So welcome to No Nonsense. If you happened to run into the grocery store the other day to pick up a quart of milk, you probably had nothing to put it in unless you have a big purse, as I do. Or you may have been in the days before Christmas, as you were wrapping your presents, discovered that plastic items had been banned by the government. The big five: the bags that you get at the grocery checkout store, plastic cutlery, plastic straws, plastic stir sticks, and the takeout containers, the ones with the black bottoms and the see-through tops that you put pre-prepared food in, all banned. So we're trying to figure out why those five things, why now, in the wake of a pandemic. So we're going to the expert, Bob Masterson, President and CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, the folks who make all this stuff and who understand what goes into it. Bob, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Pamela.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure this out. So call me crazy, but I go to buy my quart of milk. If I don't bring my cloth bags because I've just decided running on the way home that I need to pick that up, I can't get a plastic bag, but I can, because I just did this the other day, walk down the aisle, go to the garbage bag and aluminum foil section, buy a box of garbage bags, take them up to the counter, open the box, take one out and say, please put my stuff in there. Is that a true fact?
That's correct. You could do that.
It might look a bit odd, but I could do that. So it's just by way of example, like, why these five things? Why now? And particularly in the wake of 2 years of pandemic, where this was mandatory. They didn't want you reaching into a container and getting a fork or anything else. You could only touch that. So why would we ban it all?
Right. Well, that's a good question. Well, if we start back a little bit, there's no question, especially in developing countries that lack waste management infrastructure, the issue of ocean plastic waste is very serious, and especially when it washes up on beaches. And that's an issue that definitely has to be paid attention to. The government's position on why banning plastics is, we have to do our part to fight ocean litter. Well, these products that you talked about aren't going in the ocean, Canada. Doesn't mean we don't have a contribution, and we've got mechanisms to help other countries with waste management infrastructure. We do have our own unique issue in Canada, though. When you look at those products, the plastic products, we actually, and we can talk in some details about this, but we're actually very poor performers as a nation in recycling, and we only recycle about 10% of plastics. And what's the problem here? It's not that those end up in the ocean. The problem is they go to landfill, and it's a lost economic opportunity. It's about $10 billion a year of material that goes to landfill that we ought to be able to recapture the value of and reuse. And so there's lots of interesting angles to this, but the real rationale is the government wants to be seen to be addressing the problem of ocean plastics litter. It's picked some of these items because Canadians in the river and lakefront cleanups, these are the items they find the most: coffee cup lids, cigarette butts, those types of things. And that was the so-called scientific rationale for putting these on a list.
Okay, so these five things that we've talked about, the bags, the cutlery, the straws, are any of them recyclable?
Oh, absolutely. Most of them. I mean, many major Canadian municipalities already recycle plastic bags. Your grocery takeout bags, you can take them back in and put them in your blue box in British Columbia, for instance.
I recycle them because I use them to put my garbage in.
You can use them for your garbage. You reuse them. You can also use them. Many people use them for their animal waste. There's many things. So definitely they can be recyclable. And you mentioned I've got mine here, but ubiquitous takeout food container, number 5 plastic, dishwasher safe, microwave safe. You can put those in your recycling bin in anywhere in British Columbia. They get recycled. They get recycled in many cities. So why are they on the list? So there's, it's
why only in British Columbia? What did British Columbia do that the rest of
that's a very interesting question. What British Columbia did about 5 years ago is they transferred responsibility from recycling from the municipalities to business. Municipalities are stretched. They were stretched years ago They're even more stretched now in the era of the pandemic, the opioid crisis, homelessness crisis. They don't have the resources. Well, why do many municipalities ban these, or the federal government? They'll say it's difficult to recycle. The equipment can't read the black. If you put this on a black conveyor belt, it can't see it. Well, guess what? You invest in modern optical scanners, they pick these things up no problem. What happened in British Columbia is over 5 years ago, they transferred responsibility to industry. Anybody that puts packaging, including plastic, into the province, in the economy, they have to pay for the recycling system. It's not the municipal taxpayers anymore. And what's happened is that money's collected and used only for improving the recycling system. And if you look only at plastics, the province, we talk about Canada-wide being about 10% recovered plastics recycling. In British Columbia, they were in the low 40s, and now they're up to 55%. So, this is all about investment, like everything else. You don't fix a problem by banning something. You fix it by enabling innovation and encouraging and enabling innovation.
Okay, so
those are a couple examples, but many of those on the list, yes, they can and are recycled.
A couple of little side points then. So when we were paying 5 cents for a bag or 10 cents for a bag in any number of stores, where did that money go?
That went, well, I will be careful, but I would say it largely went right back to the grocery retailers. There was no mechanism in most provinces or municipalities for that to go anywhere else. They didn't collect it and pass it back on. It was meant to be a signal to you, hey, I shouldn't have to pay that 5 cents. I can avoid that if I bring my bag. And that's not a bad thing. And even if they increase that to a higher price, that's still not a bad thing. But perhaps there ought to be better mechanisms for collecting that.
Because you assume that is about recycling.
Yeah, it's not a deposit system like with your cans and bottles where you put them in a machine and you've paid it up front. That money's in the system for recycling. It's not like that.
So in British Columbia, where the industry or the creator of the product has taken this on, that's straight up at their cost. They're not getting a green grant from Ottawa.
Straight up at their cost. And then it's also depending on the material you put in, how easy is it to recycle? So things like, your simple plastic milk jugs, very, very easy to recycle. You pay a low cost for that. By the time you get up to other products like polystyrene, which is mostly air, it costs a lot of money to move that around. It's the most expensive thing. And you're actually paying, if you're a company, you're paying a tax. It's not going to the government, it's going to the recycling entity, but you're paying a tax based on how much of the material you put in and how difficult it is.
What would be a thing made out of that?
Pardon me?
What is a thing?
Oh, all your foam insulation. If you get an Amazon package or another package, you've got the foam cluster around it. That'd be an example, but also, many other types of foam. And that model's been so successful. And this is, again, we talk about the federal government's actions being arbitrary. At the same time, the federal government's making these bans, you have a situation where other provinces were already following the BC example. So Quebec, Ontario, Alberta have all introduced legislation and regulations to go down the same road, have a very similar program to British Columbia so that they too can get this out of the responsibilities of municipalities and dramatically improve recycling. So we're scratching our heads saying, well, wait a minute, we know we can recover this value. We know we can reuse these products. We know many of them can and are being recycled already. Why don't we put more energy into that? Why are we banning things that can and are recycled? And the other thing that's very frustrating, of course, to industry, I mean, there's many aspects of this we can talk about, but is, again, the arbitrariness of the policy. So, okay, I've banned this. What am I replacing it with? Probably an aluminum container, the ridged aluminum containers with the plastic top that have chemical coatings on those. And I guarantee you those are not going to be recycled and reused.
Well, I was just going to ask that.
Do you ever reuse your own aluminum tray? No, you finish your food and it goes in the garbage.
And I just went through that on the weekend. I bought several things in the containers with the black bottoms and the clear tops. I washed those and put them in my drawer. And the two things that I cooked in aluminum, pans, I threw out.
Of course. And so that's, again, that's some of that arbitrariness. So there's no mechanism here. There's no clear criteria for the government that the government has provided to us, other than, some of these things are found in beach cleanups and they're so-called also like this, again, and I've explained why, but they would say this is problematic to recycle. Well, it isn't. It's only if you haven't made the investment.
You need a different conveyor belt.
So there's no other criteria. There's nothing that says, oh, well, I'm going to replace it. Well, what's the environmental footprint the energy consumption, the water consumption, the resource consumption for the products that are going to replace these. I'm not making the case that plastic is always the better answer.
Oh, no, I get it.
As a citizen, if you're going to ban something, you better know what the implications of the other thing you're going to replace it with are. And that work has certainly not been done.
Well, so let's just take that one example. I mean, if you replace the black bottomed dish there with cardboard, it leaks. We all went through that endlessly during the pandemic when your food was being put in those kind of containers, and then you throw them out anyway, right? Because they're certainly not reusable in any way. And aluminum, can it even be recycled, those containers?
Yeah, well, they could potentially be reused, washed. They're much tougher to wash with all those ridges. Aluminum, pretty easy to recycle as long as it's clean. So there's challenge. I mean, this is what goes at the heart of a lot of the question about plastics is we like to say to people, okay, you might not be happy sometimes with the amount of plastic in your life, but there's one question you have to ask. Why? Why is my food coming in this? Well, because it's an elegant, simple, efficient solution, and it's cost effective as well. So, the people that buy these in the restaurant to send home with your takeout, they're not doing it to prop up the profits in the business of the plastics industry. They're doing it because it's the most efficient, effective, and cost-effective solution that's out there.
Yeah, it's clean and it's safe and it doesn't leak. And increasingly, the world is living that way. And we were all trained to do that in the course of the pandemic, which is, don't let anything touch anything. You've said a couple of times, and I think it's really interesting that the arbitrary nature of these things, because they have that kind of symbolic value. We've all seen the same shots of plastic in the ocean that are not on a Canadian coast,
and that's unacceptable. I mean, it's unacceptable. It doesn't belong there, and certainly it needs to be addressed. But banning these 5 items, and it's actually 6. There's another one coming next year. Doesn't solve that.
Those are the little rings that go around 6 cans of pop or beer or whatever it is. And that will be banned. Okay, so I need to go back just for a moment, and I'm sorry to be so simplistic on this, but honestly, it just kind of, so where I started, which is I can go down the aisle and get a box of garbage bags. And believe me, I don't want garbage bags to be banned because I live in an area with a lot of wild animals and I do not want to have to deal with that every day. But why is the bag that I take, which is already made out of recycled plastic, because it says that right on the bags at the grocery store, why are we getting rid of that but not the big green garbage bag?
Yeah, don't know. And the other side of that question is, what are the implications of that? And we've told the federal government, we provide the studies even from jurisdictions like California, who banned plastic bags a long time ago. You actually increase the volume and amount of plastic in the economy. Why? Because people don't get the simple bags at the checkout anymore, and they do go on the shelf. And that plastic, as you know, take your simple grocery store checkout bag. It's extremely thin. Every year it gets thinner and thinner. Like it's a very small amount of material compared to when you go back and get them in the box, container 48 off the aisle of the store. It's much more plastic. And so we don't understand, why would we ban something to replace it with more plastic? Why not go the more efficient route? And the other thing you mentioned, your bag may, and not all of them do, but your bag at checkout may say it's recyclable. But you also have the situation, and we certainly saw this with the very well-loved co-op in Alberta, where Alberta Co-op invested its own money to come up with a biodegradable plastic bag that would degrade very easily under normal conditions, and then only to be told, those are also included on this list. And we have manufacturers, many manufacturers, who saw some of this coming and also tried to convert to biodegradable materials, biodegradable straws, and other pieces of plastic to replace traditional plastics. Those are banned too, and I don't think most Canadians understand that. So it's not just
that's really a mixed message. I mean, industry is trying to respond by doing biodegradable, and then their risks are, well, I mean, it's a huge investment, and they're saying not good enough.
Not good enough, yeah. And also, you mentioned, there is a ban on sale. The other side of this too is there a ban on, using these, even if they're giveaway, it's not really for sale, given away to you at a restaurant. But there's also a ban. That only happens next year. The ban today is the ban on the manufacture of these for sale in Canada or for export to other countries. And when you look at the industry, you're talking about an industry that's largely populated by small, medium enterprises, less than 100 companies, less than 100 employees, mostly family owned. And there's a couple hundred of those that make nothing but the items that are on this list. And now, not only do they lose market share in Canada, they can't export. They're done. And they'll have to go out of business. So we even talked to the government, okay, if you're going to go down this road, what's the off-ramp? What's the time that you'll allow these people to, transition? We talk about our transitions in Canada a lot. Where was the transition for the small plastic manufacturers so that they could figure out how to survive and keep their people employed? These are well-paying jobs too. They're very sophisticated industries. So that was also a frustration with the government. Again, and I want to make sure you understand, the most frustrating thing is we share the government's objectives. Plastic does not belong in the environment. We want to recapture the value. That's good for our business. It's good for the environment. It's good for the economy. Banning these products does not help with that in any way.
And people have responded. I mean, in the old days, you rolled down your car window and threw out your pop bottle or whatever. Like, nobody would do that today.
No, well, I would hope not, but they do.
Yeah, I know.
And that's why you see some of these items that
it's just not socially acceptable. And if you have, any semi-younger person in the car, they'll wring your neck for doing that. Right. So behavior does change and is being modified.
What's lacking, though, to a certain degree, is some of the awareness, and that's on industry itself, but also others. But that basic understanding, I'm going to come back to that question of why. And where you see Canadians get especially upset about the so-called amount of plastic in their lives is when they go in the grocery store and they say, I've bought grapes my whole life. I never needed a plastic net. Why do I have a plastic net? And the thing is, guess what? There's an answer for that question. And the answer is, what used to happen is you would go up and you'd handle the grapes, say, well, I don't want those, but I want those. Exactly. And as soon as the oils on your fingers touch those grapes, they start to spoil right away. And by the end of the day, the grocery store's probably thrown out 15, 20% of all the grapes that came in because they've been handled and spoiled. Oh, I don't want those. Those are the leftovers from somebody else. Waste goes to landfill.
Yeah.
Why the net?
And wasted food. I mean, we're talking about food security.
So you pick up the bag. Those are my grapes. I can pick which one of the bags on, but that's it. So there's no spoilage anymore. And then I'll give you one more example that like me, my children are all grown up now, but I remember when they were young and baby food came in a nice little glass container with a metal lid. Most of us as adults don't bother spending much time in the baby food aisle anymore. But if you go, everything is in those ubiquitous stand-up plastic pouches with the resealable lid. Why? Safe. They don't break. They're lightweight. They're easy to reseal. And the most important thing with all the things in your grocery store, most of the cost and environmental footprint has to do with moving the material after it's made to getting to the point of purchase. And the easiest, lightest, most efficient, most climate-friendly way to do that, time and time again, is with plastics. And so that's why you see every day you go in your grocery store, you will see more and more things wrapped in plastic. Cardboard's going. It's plastic. Why? Because it's efficient to move the stuff around. So you have this dilemma where we're saying to people, hey, give up on plastic free. And the reality is the more pressure we put on energy because of pricing and the more emphasis on climate change, it does mean more and more plastic in our lives. So we've set up a very troubling conversation for ourselves where we don't want plastics, but we need them.
Just going to ask you about, I mean, there's electric vehicles are already mandatory in some ways. It's moving toward, we use a lot of plastic in those vehicles. We're not having steel metal cars anymore. So I'm assuming some of that, correct me if I'm wrong, comes from recycled plastic.
Well, I wouldn't make that claim. I think that's possible. Okay. What I would say is all the plastic that's in a car today, almost every piece of it is getting recovered and repurposed. Like in the auto scavenging sector, like you take your car back when it's finally finished its last life, it gets torn right apart to the smallest piece, and all those pieces find a way to get reused. I'm not going to make the claim that they're all going to go back into automotive parts. Some might. But increasingly, I think you're going to see that because the automotive chains as well want to make that claim to the public. I've got a product here that is made out of increasingly recycled plastics. It can be challenging, though. Like you think about it, you mentioned cars that used to be steel. You think of your bumpers today, they're all plastic. They're stronger than the steel used to be from an impact perspective. It's safer for you. But, there's a cost to making very durable, strong plastics like that. And one of the costs is it's really tough to break that down and make the same product out of it. You can shred it and do things and make other products, but you won't have that engineering strength. So there's
that's it. I mean, at some point you've got to put in here into the mix, safety. You're putting your kids in your car and you're driving them to school. You want that bumper not to collapse.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So there is a significant increase, and there's another example, like a significantly higher percent of plastics in an electric vehicle than a normal vehicle. And again, why? Lightweight, right? And what's the battery in? A big friggin' piece of plastic. Yeah. So again, we've created this conversation where we say plastics is evil. We got to get plastics out of our life, but all of the climate solutions, you're going to see more and more plastics, and people will be confused by that.
The plastic are evil. I was just reading this. This is about plastic straws. Okay. A retail store may sell a package of 20 or more flexible straws if the customer requests it. If the package is not displayed in a manner that permits the customer to view the package without the help of a store employee. This is like the cigarettes that we're putting behind dark counters because they kill you. We're making the very product that is at the core of our modern life and our modern conveniences. We're making it evil. Like it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. Evil's a strong word. I think the pressures we would say are to deselect. We're trying to encourage people to deselect plastic, and you can do that. But again, you better be conscious of what the consequences are of that. If you've deselected plastic for certain application, what is it you're replacing it with? And what are the life cycle implications of that? Some cases, perhaps it's better to not use plastic, but in most cases, as we say, there's a reason why it's there in the first place. So that's the challenge is this emphasis to deselect this material. And, you're creating confusion. And when we talked about this container, actually, it's very interesting. If you read the regulation, it talks, which most of these are now, it contains a pigment called carbon black. So it's not actually the container, it's this container, which all of them are made of carbon black. So now, theoretically, industry could get the exact same thing on the shelf, provided it doesn't contain carbon black. And then what happens? So you go to your local restaurant, and the clerk who's getting paid minimum wage at best is going to send you home with your stuff, and somebody's going to say, "Why are you giving me that? That's banned. You're giving me something that's banned." Is someone that's making minimum wage at a restaurant going to be able to explain, well, it's not actually banned because it doesn't contain carbon black? I don't think that conversation is going to happen. So I'll use the word arbitrary.
There are some things that just don't make sense. Like, so where will you put the leftovers? Like, what are you going to put them in? One of my beefs is we've gone back to paper bags at liquor stores. And I asked about that in a liquor store because their policy is if the bag breaks on the way to the car, they have to kind of pick up the cost. So,
I didn't know
that. Well, maybe not all stores, depends on if they're private or publicly run. But I mean, it seems to me one of the last places in the world you want to use a paper bag.
And again, it's not for us
in there.
And it's not for us to say what the consumer should desire. If the consumer wants to have a paper bag, take your paper bag. Where we get upset is the fact that if you wish to have a plastic bag because it's more convenient for you, maybe you have other things to carry, that you're not allowed to have that. And the reasons for that aren't clear. And, again, you think about where industry is coming from on an issue like this. Is it really about those 6 products? Not entirely. First, again, for those few 300 companies, 10,000 employees that are out of work now, yes, they care about that. But what industry is also worried about is the government, in giving itself the powers to ban these 6 products, has said that all plastic manufactured items are toxic. So they now have the legislative authority to go and ban, and they're already talking about it. You've heard them last week. They're already talking about banning more and more things, right? Plastic, applicators for feminine hygiene products, many other things. And so this is, where does it stop? And again, what's the criteria that you're going to use? Is it you just wake up one day and say, I don't like that thing, I'm going to ban it? I don't think we live in a society where that's the best way to make decisions. So you're looking for that criteria-based approach. What are the criteria, which we don't believe, if you believe things should be banned, what are the criteria you're using, and how are you going to assess the alternatives? And that has not been done in this area at all.
What is the consultation process like? I was reading just another paragraph here, and the regulations on this are like this thick, okay? I mean, it's a huge number. And as you quite rightly say, there's no more discussion anymore. They can just wake up tomorrow and say, now item X and item Y are gone too.
Well, they have to do the regulatory analysis, but yes, they have the legislative authority.
Yeah, consequence for the industries. So the regulations are they are expected to reduce the risk of ecological harm to wildlife, their habitats, and increase Canadians' enjoyment of nature. I was glad to see that part there. What is a reasonable way to have this discussion? How do we balance our modern life, where we have our computers here that are made out of plastic, and the batteries, and the cups for convenience because I'm on the move, and the car, all the things that are part of our modern life, versus this notion that, and we've heard it from cabinet ministers, that your life is going to be more difficult. It's not going to be easy. You're not going to be cool in the summer and warm in the winter necessarily. You're not going to be able to take that take out food home and hold your cans with one, piece of plastic. Like, where do we have that debate about whether or not we're prepared to give up our modern life and to take it away from countries that haven't even experienced a moment of it?
Well, I would say the best place for those discussions is perhaps in the Senate chambers and in the House of Commons itself.
Yeah, good point.
At that level, certainly that's where you want to have those discussions. I talked a little bit about the other actions, the provinces moving towards and setting very tough goals. Like in British Columbia, they had a goal to get to 50% plastics recycling. They've already exceeded that. They're going to move to 75%. Now you're getting to a place where, and we see this already, let's think about what's really driving change in the system. It's our customers. Our customers are making commitments and demanding more recycled content in their own products. So that's happening. Does the federal government have a role to either backstop that and make sure it does happen, or try to accelerate it either through innovation or regulation? Yes. And so we are in the middle also of discussions with the federal government around recycled content in products. Like, there's no reason this, for instance, shouldn't be made with a very high degree of recycled content. Your milk jug containers, things like that. There's no reason those shouldn't have a very high recycled content, and over time even higher. There are some applications, and I talked about the car bumper perhaps, where you're going to have to think about that. There's a reason why it's more durable. But for many consumer-facing products, we can and should be able to get to the recycled content. But to do that, we've got to solve the front-end problem, which is what the provinces are doing, to make sure the material is getting recovered and is available to be recycled. So again, we agree with the very principles of what the federal government wants, which is to protect Canadians and the environment. We agree that we shouldn't have materials going to landfill, and certainly not into our waterways. And we agree that we should have industry paying for the recycling system, and we agree we should have product standards that say over time we should hit more and more rates of recycled content in our products. So agree. What we fundamentally can't agree with is that these should be banned on an arbitrary basis.
Right. So now, does the same process apply to all of the replacement products? Cardboard.
No, absolutely. There is no assessment. There is no criteria. You might wake up in 10 years and say, "Oh, geez, we have to ban this as well." Why? Well, you didn't think about it, right? Yeah. There's no criteria for what goes on this list, and there's no assessment of the alternatives and the impact of those alternatives. None. And so then you get into things. And again, if a customer wants a paper bag, like at your liquor store, good on you. That's wonderful. The province of
Bring
Quebec,
your own. I mean, people
you
like
can bring your own too, but
that's
the
all.
province of Quebec has shown that that paper bag, has a much higher environmental footprint than the plastic bag. And then you talk about, well, what about your reusable
And
sacks?
you have to wash it.
Denmark, the province of Quebec, not industry, other regulatory authorities have said, yeah, you could do that. That bag that you're carrying, and you should, it's the right thing to do. But you need to use that 300 times before you have a benefit over using 300 individual plastic bags. How many of us are actually going to use those bags 300 times? So are we really creating a system where we're actually increasing the environmental impacts?
Well, and as we saw in the pandemic, you weren't allowed to bring your own bags from home into stores.
Or you recycle, or your own cup into your Starbucks or your.
No, you couldn't do any of that for safety. So presumably those issues are important to us as a society. We don't want to keep transmitting diseases of any kind, whether it's the flu in the fall or whatever it may be. There was a reason that those rules were put in place, because they were leading to transmission. So it just seems, I guess the timing, that's what I find bizarre, which is literally before the pandemic is even over. People are still in hospitals dying of COVID. We're saying, okay, never mind that again. We don't need to worry about that kind of
transmission. Certainly in COVID, we saw so much of the reality of the role of plastics in the medical industry. I mean, most people don't know those N95 masks. That's a blown, let's call it a blown polypropylene. It's a plastic. It's actually the same plastic as this, just in a different form. And so, again, we have to be very cautious if we're trying to create the case in Canadians' minds that plastics are bad. We need to be careful. Do plastics belong in the environment? Absolutely not. Are plastics evil and banned and should be removed from our lives? We will have a much poorer standard of living and much more negative economic and health and environment and health outcomes if we were to do that. So we have to be careful how we talk about these materials. Right? Yeah. No,
I have three things I just want to kind of run past you for your comments. So governments say that these things that we've been discussing are just too difficult to recycle. And so they have to be banned. You're saying they are not too difficult to recycle. And besides, it's on industry's back, not yours.
Let me give you the best example. Some of them have been historically difficult. Like a straw is tough to recycle, right? Those little tubes, you get caught in machine. So this ban took effect at the end of December on manufacturing these products, correct? At the end of December. The first week of January, Recycle BC, which is the organization that oversees recycling in British Columbia, they told all British Columbians, you can now put your plastic straws into your box and they will get recycled. So
they are recyclable.
They are recyclable.
So
with the infrastructure.
We have to send all our stuff to BC.
And that infrastructure is, as we've seen in BC, the dramatic improvements they've made. The key provinces, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, they're going down the same road. It's going to take a little bit of time, but they're going there in the next couple of years. And they will leapfrog. It won't take them as long, even 4 or 5 years, to get the results BC did. It'll happen very quickly
because people
know what they're doing. And then we could talk about actually letting the materials move around, right? So and this is another thing that's very frustrating in this area, is we hear all the time governments say, well, we need to treat our materials, our post-consumer materials, as a resource. Yes, but we regulate them as a waste. So go back to that example in British Columbia. If you grow your trees in BC and you want to make a house out of lumber in Alberta, no problem. Bring the lumber over and make your house in Alberta, and vice versa. But man, you collect post-consumer plastics in British Columbia and you think you're going to send them to Alberta to get reprocessed and turned into products? That doesn't go very easily. So there's a whole other order of work to follow, which is how do we remove what I call the political geography barriers to this material actually being a resource. Come back to that idea.
Those issues everywhere on interprovincial trade. I mean, if everybody was to live by the rules, truckers would have to stop at the Alberta border and change their tires, right?
And certainly if you're from, Truro, Nova Scotia or somewhere, is it really efficient for you to create all the infrastructure to recycle these products? Absolutely not. But if you can get it in close to Quebec City or Montreal or maybe even Halifax, you've got a significant enough population density that these things can happen. So they have to move around, or they'll go to landfill and the economic value will be lost.
Yeah. The whole question of, and again, these are the bigger questions, but bans versus adaptations.
Yeah.
We're having that same discussion in the oil and gas sector, right? Because the industry, as in your case, I think too, always leads this. I mean, you do what's in your best financial interest, right? You also live in this world. So oil and gas workers don't want to pollute the world for their children either. I'm assuming people, the chemical industry doesn't want to make the planet an unsafer place. You live here too, like just in general. So is there an argument about adaptation, that we are making these bits of progress? As you say, you cited the co-op. They went ahead and made the biodegradable bags, and then whap, no, that's not good enough. So how do we deal with those two kind of, I don't know, very black and white?
Well, I think you put in some things do require regulation, and they do require signals in addition to whatever the market's sending.
Right.
And your Unilevers, your Coca-Colas, your Pepsis, they are demanding that the plastics they get have recycled content, and they're setting very clear requirements for their suppliers, and they're going to be really tough to hit. There is a role for government to help make that happen, to make sure it happens, and make sure it happens quickly. So we have this government, we always hear them talk about polluter pays. Well, when I say in British Columbia, the cost for recycling system came out of the municipalities and now are owned 100% by industry, and we're going the same way, legislate to go the same way in Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta, that is polluter pays. And so you've created that incentive right away where this is the right thing to do. So principles-based approach. And if you do want to ban something, again, maybe on occasion, and we've got other things in society to ban, but not cigarettes, for instance, what are the criteria?
The taxes are too valuable.
Alternatives?
The taxes on cigarettes are too valuable to governments.
Valuable.
Yeah.
So that's you're asking again a higher order question that is really well beyond our industry. It's more about where are we going as a society, and I could offer my personal opinions, but I don't think they're that valuable to others.
What about outcomes here? How will or when might we ever know whether this was a good idea?
Well, you'll know that you will know it will never deliver a real result, and government officials in committee have said exactly the same thing. There's no ability to collect data to report on if there's less litter in the environment. There's no clarity on whether this gives any benefit at all, and that's the government's own officials that have said that, and they've also had it in writing. So we're going down that road. If there is a higher order question, I think that deserves to be asked, though, is what are the true motivations for a government to do this? And I talk about this in my industry a lot. There's no question where the pressure to do this comes from, environmental, non-governmental organizations. How are they funded? They're funded by individuals, which is the right thing to do. It's not government money, it's individuals. But the government looks at those organizations and says, oh, they have 250,000 donors. If I'm seen to be responsive to that organization, I'm responsive to 250,000 Canadians. So the challenge for us as industry, as I tell my industry all the time, is how do we activate our own value chains, our employees, our customers, our suppliers, their employees, their families, and get them to participate in this democratic process.
Have a political voice, because then you're a group that government wants to.
Exactly. So right now we're a businesses, and businesses don't vote. We have no democratic voice. And it's, again, I'm not knocking the model is the right model. I think, my own perspective, the only time I've seen our industries use that role and those opportunities was really back in the NAFTA discussions over 30 years ago now. And so if we don't find a way to say, wait a minute, elected officials of any party that are making decisions have to see that there are real people and real lives behind these decisions, the onus is on us to find a way to activate the people that are in these organizations, again, our customers, our suppliers, the employees, their families, to also participate in this democratic process. We're having this conversation until someone, I'm a good one when I go shopping with my wife. I roll my eyes when I can't get my plastic bag. Some Canadians will do that, but most have no idea that this is taking place, and it isn't going to harm their lives yet. we'll see what some of the other decisions are down the road. But it's not. It's just a inside the parliamentary precinct conversation for
Right.
most people.
Have there been, or do you expect there will be legal challenges to this, just for the interference with the right of people to, I don't know, seek a healthy or safety,
there is an active legal challenge by a subset of producers of plastics who think that the federal government has overreached its jurisdictional authorities under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, that it wasn't intended to do that. We're not a part of that process, but we're following it actively. And I believe there's a significant date coming up in March for the next phase of that process. So yeah, there's an active challenge. I mean, again, if you're one of these companies, you've invested millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in a family business, and all of a sudden, and again, I'll use that word, in a very arbitrary manner, you were given 6 months notice that you can't do something, and suddenly you're out of business and close your doors. You better be taking legal challenge. Otherwise, what comes next? So you've got people here that have been severely impacted without any transitional support or anything else. Right. And for sure, they are going to be exploring every opportunity to figure out, did the federal government exercise legitimate authorities, or did they overreach? And again, that's a great process. Everybody has the opportunity to use it, and that's what the courts are for.
Yeah, good question. Bob, just really great to talk with you. Thank you. You've given us some other insights here into how to look at these issues rather than just having a temper tantrum at the grocery store.
Right.
So this is really, really helpful and very thoughtful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your interest. Thanks very much.
Bob Masterson is the president and CEO of the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada. All the people that make all the stuff that has plastic in it that we use every single day. So I'll thank you for that too, because it does make life a lot of easier.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that, but to look around your office, look around your home.
I know.
It's plastic, right?
Yeah, the whole 9 yards. You're absolutely right.
So the question is why?
We will talk again. Thank you so much. All right. That is it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. We'll see you soon.